As the region was preparing to say goodbye, and in a number of ways good riddance, to 2025, Yemen decided to say, hold my drink. From the end of November and over the start of December, the Southern Transitional Council, or STC, launched a major offensive. With little effort, their forces swept across the eastern governorates of Hadramaut and Al-Mahra. They seized the government-held cities of Sayun and Tarim and took control of the vital and lucrative oil fields. Among the supporters of the STC, there was jubilation and hope that their ultimate goal would be achieved. Speaking to a reporter, one said, "We urge our political leadership in the Southern Transitional Council, led by Abdurros bin Qasim al-Zubaydi, to meet the demands of the southern people by declaring an independent state and restoring our lands within the 1990 borders." The jubilation, however, was short-lived. No sooner had the STC taken control of the governorates, Saudi Arabia launched a series of airstrikes and ground operations, and quickly took back what had been taken. The Yemeni government spoke out against the actions of the STC, but also against their financial and political backers, the United Arab Emirates. On December 30th, the leader of Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad al-Alimi, said, as stated with deep regret in the statement issued by the leadership of the joint forces of the coalition to support legitimacy, it has also been confirmed that the United Arab Emirates loaded 2 ships from the port of Fujairah with weapons, combat vehicles and military equipment, and then unloaded them at the port of Mukalla without authorization, with the aim of supplying the forces of the Southern Transitional Council. This constitutes an escalatory step against the security and stability of the governorates of Hadramaut and Al-Mahra. This week, what happened in Yemen's eastern provinces and why? What does it mean for the future of the Southern Transitional Council, and how has the power balance shifted in Yemen? My name is Hugo Goodridge, and you're listening to The New Arab Voice. The war in Yemen has ripped the country apart and created one of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet. Over 150,000 people are believed to have been killed as a result of direct military action, with thousands more killed by indirect consequences of the war, such as hunger or disease. For a time, the war dominated discourse in the region, but in more recent times, it has slipped off the front page. In part, this is due to other events, such as the genocide in Gaza taking up space in the consciousness, but also due to the fact that the armed conflict between the warring parties had died down considerably. The most recent major confrontation in the country had occurred across 2021 and 2022 with the Battle of Marib between the forces of the Yemeni government, heavily backed by Saudi Arabia, and the Houthi forces, backed heavily by Iran. After months of fighting, a UN-brokered ceasefire took hold. While the Houthis' attacks on shipping routes ramped up tensions and saw increased attacks by Israel and Western powers, the ceasefire has broadly held until the end of 2025, when the Southern Transitional Council, or STC, launched Operation Promising Future. There are a few major players in Yemen, with the STC being one of them. But who are they, and where did they come from?
The Southern Transitional Council was established in 2017.
This is Bala Shayban, Associate Fellow with the Royal United Services Institute in London.
And that's after the battles that have happened in the south of Yemen, on paper between a coalition that is supporting the Yemeni government and the Houthis, who were occupying a significant part of the country in 2015. Now, part of that coalition was the United Arab Emirates, which had actual fighting force on the ground, but it was working with Southern secessionists, solely with Southern secessionists who have had their grievances and protests against the Yemeni government prior to this whole crisis, prior to even the Arab Spring in 2011. And agendas of the two countries of the coalition, which is again on paper supporting the Yemeni government, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, ended up supporting different factions. In 2017, eventually, the Southern Transitional Council was announced.
With the backing of the UAE, the newly formed Southern Transitional Council was not just a political movement, but also a military force. And a military force that controlled land. While the STC is, relatively speaking, a new group, the Southern Secessionist movement is not. A very quick history lesson. Following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after the First World War, North Yemen became an independent kingdom, while South Yemen ultimately became a British colony. After a Soviet-backed insurgency, South Yemen kicked the British out. In the decades that followed, North and South Yemen fought a number of wars until 1990, when the two countries were unified into the Republic of Yemen. But back to today. Despite being part of the government, at least on paper, there had been clashes between the STC and the Yemeni government.
And they had multiple rounds of conflict, which culminated in 2019 when the STC effectively took control over the interim capital of Yemen, Aden, the port city of Aden. Now, that's kind of a background story of what happened prior to this crisis in December 2025.
With the agreement that ended the fighting between the STC and the government in 2019, and the UN-brokered ceasefire that halted the violence between the government and the Houthis in 2022, there was hope that Yemen might be able to look to a more peaceful future.
After 2019 infighting that happened between the STC and the Yemeni government, it looked clearly that the objectives and aims of the two main parties of the coalition, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, are drifting. And they're bound to clash. The real question is not if they are going to clash, but actually when is that going to happen?
That question was answered on December 2nd, when the forces of the Southern Transitional Council advanced north through the Sah district in Hadramaut Governorate, and by the end of the day were just 10 kilometres from the city of Sayoun. The following day, the STC's forces launched an offensive in Wadi Hadramaut, and in Sayoun took control of the presidential palace in the city and the airport. Over the following days, the STC strode across the region, facing little opposition, and what opposition was given crumbled fairly quickly. Cities, towns, villages, and vital oil fields all fell to the forces of the STC. They moved fast and were well armed. But why now? After a period of apparent stability in Yemen, why decide to tip over the apple cart now?
I think there are multiple factors that tell us something about the timing, and some are domestic within Yemen and some are perhaps regional.
This is Yasmin Al-Ilyani, Executive Director for Knowledge Production at the Sana Center for Strategic Studies.
First of all, the status quo that was there before was unsustainable because you had a government of Yemen and under it various groups that were competing all the time, and it was very difficult to govern and exercise their role effectively on the ground, and also even develop a common negotiating position when it comes to a peace settlement. And this competition and rivalry was I believe, unsustainable.
On the surface, Yemen might have appeared, relatively speaking, more stable. Much was made about the Saudi Houthi ceasefire. It was framed as the answer to the problems plaguing Yemen. But the disagreements within the country ran far deeper than just these two elements. Bada Shaiban again.
And that's effectively what's happening is the Yemeni government, although on paper it looks like it's controlling more than 70% of the territory, it's kind of being eroded from the inside by this growing force of separatist forces, the STC, more and more control of territory, but also now have been incorporated with the Yemeni government because of the talks that our Saudi Arabia were leading. We're encouraging the Yemeni government to absorb the STC into the Yemeni government, but they remained separate. They had their own security apparatus, they have their own military apparatus, resisting any aims really for incorporating their members within the formal Yemeni government structures.
The STC offensive did not come out of nowhere. It was the result of a growing discontentment. And it wasn't the only reason. With a quote-unquote ceasefire being agreed in Gaza, some regional attention returned to Yemen, and specifically to talk about resuming the peace process in the country, often called the roadmap. Yasmin Al-Iryani.
With that kind of public expression to revive the roadmap, I think that triggered certain fears within the STC, because the roadmap was discussed in a way where all the other Yemeni groups and political groups in Yemen were excluded, with the exception of the Houthis. And STC was very dissatisfied by this, and UAE as well, because they felt that they had supported Saudi Arabia in the coalition and invested in their allies, and now they saw that Saudi Arabia was willing to go into direct talks and even a settlement with the Houthis and without everyone else. And I think that may have triggered also some serious existential fears for a group like STC.
A founding principle of the STC is the desire to create an independent state along the same borders that once marked South Yemen.
Another factor for the timing could be that STC was feeling the tides in the region were changing. Perhaps it anticipated Israel's recognition of Somaliland. There was also a statement by the president of STC just shortly before these events that once there is a southern state, an independent southern state in Yemen, there could be a track towards joining the Abraham Accords, for example. I think maybe also the STC felt that this was a moment where they could have backing from not only UAE but also from Israel.
The STC themselves told the New Arab Voice their reasons for launching the operation.
This operation addressed immediate threats from extremist militias.
This is Mohammed Al-Sahimi, head of the STC UK office.
That was the aim when the operation were launched. They were foreign-backed entities and organized linked to Muslim Brotherhoods and Houthis that had destabilized the region. They were halting oil production and threatened the local and regional interest as well. The aim was to eliminate a terrorist staging ground because the 1st Area Brigade was, as the STC saying, it was used by terrorist organizations as a staging point and a smuggling route for the Houthis as well. So mainly was to restore local governance and security infrastructure and critical to countering terrorism.
Terrorism has been a problem in Yemen for some time, with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP, being active for a number of years. The STC has previously engaged in anti-terror operations against AQAP and also against groups like the Islah Party and the Houthis. While the STC classifies the likes of the Islah Party as terrorists, others view groups like this as political Islamists. The STC's view is similar to the view taken by the UAE. The UAE are the main backers of the STC, But how close are these two? Is the UAE a keen supporter or the puppet master of military groups in Yemen?
STC relies solely on support from UAE in terms of funding, in terms of arming, and so on. A decision of this scale, it's hard to imagine that it was taken without a green light, at least from UAE. STC could perhaps have some agency on very domestic matters, but when it comes to decisions of war and peace or a move to take over regions that are seen to be under the control of Saudi Arabia or Al Mahra under Oman or closer to Oman, that is a decision that is hard to imagine was taken without a green light from the UAE. That being said, STC is also a framework for the cause of independence or secession, and that continues regardless of UAE support. But the decision to move militarily in that way, it's hard to imagine that it was done without a UAE backing or even encouragement.
The STC had multiple reasons to move when they did, and multiple reasons to rationalise what they did. And the UAE would have, at a minimum, given their blessing for the operation, and might even have gone as far as ordering the operation. Additionally, the forces of the STC were able to sweep across the eastern governorates of Yemen in the fashion that they did because of the material support of the UAE.
When finally they took control over the eastern provinces in early December, the United Arab Emirates encouraged that. So you started to have more funding going in, more armored vehicles arriving via the ports that are now run by the United Arab Emirates slash STC. The United Arab Emirates have tactical command units that are present on the ground. Although they announced that they have evacuated Yemen in 2019 in the previous crises, if you'd like to say, but they had actual forces on the ground that are kind of leading operationally the military actions of the Southern Transitional Council. Finally, until the Southern Transitional Council looked like they can finally reach close to the border of Saudi Arabia.
The equipment and military coordination provided by the UAE helped the STC to make rapid gains. Jubilation followed among supporters, but their joy was short-lived.
And actually, it seemed that at the beginning, when they took over these territories, is that they had created a situation where it would be impossible not to include them in a negotiating table.
On December 25th, Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry issued a statement claiming that the actions of the STC had, quote, resulted in an unjustified escalation that harmed the interests of all segments of Yemeni people, as well as the Southern cause and the coalition's efforts, end quote. They added that, quote, the kingdom stresses the importance of cooperation among all Yemeni factions and components to exercise restraint and avoid any measures that could destabilize security and stability, which may result in undesirable consequences. They demanded that the STC withdraw from all their recently seized territories in the Hadramaut and Al Mahra governorates. But they did not. The next day, Saudi Arabia conducted 2 airstrikes that targeted STC positions in Hadramaut. On the 27th, the Saudis once again ordered the STC back from captured areas. At the same time, it was reported that 15,000 Saudi-backed fighters were on the Saudi-Yemeni border, awaiting orders.
Saudi Arabia formed a force called the Homeland Shield that were trained by the Yemeni-Saudi border. They're being trained, they're being ready, but they're not actually deployed. They stay there basically in the military camps by the Yemeni-Saudi border, and it was supposed to be a unit that respond immediately to the head of the presidential council, so to the commander-in-chief, the Yemeni president. And the aim of that was basically to avoid this kind of situation. If the troops on the ground, who are basically run by the members of the council, do not comply with the demands of the president, he can deploy those forces. Those forces also, the Homeland Shield, coordinate quite closely with the Saudi Ministry of Defense. They provide close attention to them, close support to them, and close funding. And it was those forces are the ones who moved from the Saudi border and went to the eastern provinces to claim back the military camps and the territory that was at the time controlled by the STC.
On December 30th, there were more airstrikes, this time targeting 2 ships which had come from the UAE and were docked in the Yemeni port of Mukalla. It was claimed that the ships had delivered arms and armoured vehicles for use by the STC. Simultaneously, more statements from the Saudis.
Which is basically when all of us saw the news on the 30th of December, which is the Yemeni government is officially declaring it's ending its bilateral security and military cooperation with the United Arab Emirates and demanding the United Arab Emirates to leave within 24 hours. Saudi Arabia endorsed that statement by the Yemeni government and actually said in clear terms that the United Arab Emirates did take actions that would undermine the security of Saudi Arabia and also undermine the control of the Yemeni government and the presence of the Yemeni government.
On December 31st, STC forces began a partial withdrawal from several locations in Hadramaut. On January 2nd, the Saudi-backed Homeland Security Forces began military operations to retake military bases seized by the STC. By the next day, Saudi Arabia confirmed that all military and civilian facilities in Al-Mukalla and in the city of Hadramaut had been recaptured. And by the 4th day, all 9 districts in Hadramaut Governorate had been secured by the forces of the Yemeni government. What started in early December as a sweeping military success was now a shattered failure. And it didn't end there. On January 7th, forces of the Yemeni government entered Aden, the capital of the Southern Transitional Council. The former flag of South Yemen was removed from buildings, and its leader, Aydros al-Zubaydi, was charged with treason.
What was left really was kind of a loose network of militants of the STC without that operational command, kind of that brain that is enabled to strategize for them and to effectively make them more efficient in terms of their fighting. And that's why they got overwhelmed quite easily. This also, in addition to the local tribesmen who the STC have used basically brutal force against in the past, so we'd have local grievances against the STC suddenly coming up to the surface, and the STC had to withdraw.
There were indications that at some point the STC would attempt something. They obviously felt that at the start of December the time was right. And for a time, they were right, until they were very wrong, and everything came crashing down around them. STC representative Mohammed al-Sahimi again.
We are still observing the events in the south. The direct military action against us by the Saudis was never expected. The Saudi is an ally. We partnered with them for many years in the fight against the Houthis. The unprecedented military escalation against us by the Saudis underground forces caused many casualties, among them troops and civilians. So that was not expected at all.
As much as the towns and cities of the Eastern Governorates were taken by surprise, so were the STC by the Saudi response. But should they have not expected a Saudi response on this scale?
There has been precedence in the past where STC escalated on the ground militarily and received what it wanted as a result. In 2019, we saw an escalation on the ground in Aden against then President Hadi, and That actually resulted in an agreement brokered by Saudi Arabia called the Riyadh 2019. And after that, STC was kind of taken into the fold of the government of Yemen and took a more prominent and significant role within the government of Yemen.
To not have expected a response would have been naive, but it appears to have been the scale of the response that caught the STC off guard.
But what we saw was something very different, perhaps for multiple reasons. One is that really Hadramaut, especially the valley and desert region, is a red line for Saudi Arabia. That's number one. Number two, I think also what I mentioned earlier, the regional shifts that were taking place that may have also triggered certain fears and very high perception threats within some countries in the region, including Saudi Arabia, that the UAE and Israel would advance further in the region and very strategic locations with the Somaliland recognition and on waterways and so on. And I think that also showed how other countries like Turkey, perhaps Egypt and others, Oman, felt that this was something not to be taken lightly, and it required decisive reaction from Saudi Arabia. So I think also the reason for this reaction lies elsewhere, not only in Yemen, but also in the Horn of Africa and Sudan and the broader region. That was not calculated by STC or UAE.
Bala Shaban.
While Saudi Arabia is more calculated, more reserved, and try mostly to play a mediating role. So it would favor, of course, it would state publicly it's supporting the Yemeni government, but it's more like trying to mediate things. So more reserved in how they approach. And I think they calculated it in a similar terms that Saudi Arabia is going to do the same again. It's going to mediate. It's not going to actually get involved. When the United Arab Emirates sent shipments to support the STC, that's including heavy armory and armored vehicles, and they did it in a way that was very provoking to the Yemeni government because they turned off the navigation system and the tracking system of the ships so they can dock at the port of Mukalla in the eastern part of Yemen without, causing a lot of attention. Saudi Arabia decided to bomb not the ship itself, but the components. So once they left the ship to dock at the port, they bombed them. They bombed them immediately, destroying. It's not a significant now in terms of it's not a huge airstrike, but it's signaling enough that it's willing to take actual military force if needed. And even when it started conducting the airstrikes against some of the positions of the STC, they're very small and it's not a huge amount of damage, but it's more the signaling, the messaging it's sending that if you don't comply with our demands, I'm willing to use force.
With a treason charge hanging over his head, STC leader Aydros al-Zubaydi disappeared. Rumours started to circulate that he had fled to the mountains of Al-Dahle, where he is from, or travelled to the UAE via Somaliland. We've also had conflicting reports about the location of al-Zubaydi. Do you have any word on where he is?
As far as we know, he's in Aden and he's managing the situation.
Following their defeat on the battlefield and the loss of not just the territory that they captured, but all territory that they had previously held, there was only one thing left for the STC to do: negotiate. On January 7th, a delegation of southern separatists travelled to Riyadh. Witnesses reported seeing them on the plane, and then getting off the plane in Saudi Arabia and onto a bus. Then, all contact went dark. Relatives of the delegation attempted to make contact, but to no avail. It was believed that the delegates' phones had all been confiscated. That evening, the STC released a statement claiming, Quote, over 50 STC officials have been arbitrarily detained and taken to an unknown location by the Saudis, end quote. On January 9th, they resurfaced, but the picture did not become any clearer. Speaking from Riyadh, Abdul Rahman al-Subehi, Secretary General of the STC, said, "We therefore announce the dissolution of the Southern Transitional Council, the dissolution of all its main and subsidiary bodies and institutions, the closure of all its offices at home and abroad, and work towards achieving our Southern goal through preparations for a comprehensive Southern Conference under the auspices of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia." In response to this, STC spokesman Anwar al-Tamimi, speaking from Abu Dhabi, said, quote, "This news is ridiculous." He declared that such a position can only be made by the Council in its entirety and under the President. He added, quote, "This will be done immediately upon the release of the Southern Transitional Council delegation currently in Riyadh. The Council will continue its positive and constructive engagement with all political initiatives in a manner that enables the people of the South to determine their future." End quote. On January 10th, the supporters of the STC made their feelings clear. In the former capital of the STC, Aden, thousands of demonstrators took to the streets. One protester told a reporter, "We are the ones who appointed the Southern Transitional Council in this very square. We are the ones who renewed the Pledge of Allegiance here today. As for the people in Riyadh, bin Salman, keep them for all you want." Today, the picture of what the STC is, who they are, and if it still exists, remains unclear. But what is clear is that there remains in Yemen a constituency who do want an independent state in the south. Those people still believe in the cause, even if the group does not exist.
Perhaps what is needed now is that those who were affiliated to STC and the STC leaders who are in Riyadh and who are open to a dialogue should be contained within these discussions and taken also seriously. And there needs to be a reassurance that the Southern cause is not going to be diluted as a result of the Riyadh talks. And that it's still a legitimate cause that will not be erased. And that, I think that's important. This is a very important moment where any type of exclusion of any group, even if that group was an agitator, it could result in unintended consequences. We have still a lot of armed groups on the ground in Yemen who are not within the government of Yemen's control. And we have a population that is restless. And so you could have a lot of unrest as a result of a feeling of exclusion. And it could also take military form. So I think this is a very dangerous moment, and I don't think any exclusion of any group at this point is going to be productive or constructive.
The Southern cause is bigger than the STC, and it's bigger than individuals. So even if the STC, doesn't exist tomorrow, there will be another component that will take over, and the people will continue to fight for their cause, because it's a life cause that existed before the Arab Spring. It existed before the conflict in Yemen. So it's a conflict or a cause with a history, and it will continue to be there. And whatever comes out of the Riyadh conference, if that's positive, people will cooperate with that, and we will welcome it, and we will work around that. But if it is something that doesn't meet the aspiration of the Southern people, people will reject it, and then they will continue their peaceful process or their peaceful struggle.
Following recent events, Saudi Arabia is the most dominant foreign player in Yemen today. And they are unlikely to be welcoming of such separatist opinions.
For Saudi Arabia, which is usually the case with a lot of big states, which it has vast territory, it doesn't want to encourage separatism. That's why, for example, it doesn't encourage the Kurds in their quest for a state in Iraq. They once they've had someone now they're feeling comfortable with in Damascus, they want to support this kind of the unification, the unity of Syria. That's why now they're meeting the president of Somalia. They're not going to recognize, or at least make sure that no one recognizes Somaliland as a breakaway region. Similarly in Yemen, but the difference is Yemen is by Saudi border. Once you start encouraging separatism, then of course you're going to have separatist voices inside the kingdom and also in other places saying, well, if that did succeed there, why it can't happen over here?
Given the power and influence that Saudi Arabia holds in Yemen, the STC's hope for an independent state are slim to nothing. But given the support that they still hold among the population, can they be guaranteed a place at the table and a voice that carries weight?
As we see things now, the STC is out of the picture as a political military group. STC delegation in Riyadh will go into the talks in Riyadh, but how will the STC continue as a group afterwards is I think a big question mark, and whether they would be allowed to continue to be armed or they would be pressured to give up their arms, and if so, what would this result in? So I think now is not the question of whether STC would be given a big piece of the pie, but rather whether it would even be on the negotiating table.
I think the future of Aidarus al-Zabidi is out. He kind of ended his political career because I don't think he can, at least not in the near future, he can come back to Yemen. And it is really upon the Yemeni government and Saudi Arabia to reach some kind of reconciliation with the members of the STC of how they can incorporate them with the future arrangement. The messages are saying that the members, the fighting force of the STC are not going to be dissolved or disbanded, that they want them to all stay in their positions, but then get incorporated within the official structure of Yemen. Something they're saying they're not going to repeat the de-Baathification model. But yeah, I think we can only wait and see what will, the future hold.
STC representative Mohammed Al-Sahimi.
We just want to ensure the peace process or the dialogues is an inclusive solution for the South, led by the efforts on the ground and not imposed on the people. We also need to prevent the Southern Coast being reduced to a bargaining chip between the regional players. It's a cause that exists, and it's the aspiration of the people. So that's something that we need to respect.
Recent events have brought Saudi Arabia and the UAE to the battlefield by proxy and pushed them apart diplomatically. But they do still have one thing in common. They are still both good friends of the United States. So, can Donald Trump do anything to help? Bala Shaiban of the Royal United Services Institute.
The United States, at least its official stance, is that they want to preserve the unity and integrity of Yemen. They think it is important. It's in the foreign policy interest. It's support for the Yemeni government, and so I think more or less it looks more likely it would favor the Saudi approach to how things are in Yemen. But I think they can form some kind of a mediation to avoid this tension between two allies. And also, let's not forget, also Saudi Arabia for a long time does consider United Arab Emirates one of its strongest partners. It's important for the unity of the GCC as a whole. I think its strongest trade partner is the United Arab Emirates. So I think it is also in the best interest of both countries to cool things down.
The STC, with the backing of the UAE, struck out from their positions in early December. A little over a month later, they had lost everything they gained and more. It will now be up to the Yemeni government, guided firmly by Saudi Arabia, to decide what role, if any, the southern separatists will play in the future. They might be willing to make some deals to guarantee loyalty. They might insist on complete adherence to their line with the threat of violence. Whatever comes out of the end of this political wrangling, they will be responsible for Yemen and the people of Yemen. And the people of Yemen are in desperate need of some help. Yemen is one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. The services across the country are in tatters. 18 million people face acute food insecurity, and global aid budgets are being slashed from historic lows. Final words, Yasmin Al-Iryani of the Sana Center.
So I think this is a moment also where you have this major, I would say, foundational developments taking place. And while the population is fearful of what will come next, it is also perhaps hopeful that maybe this will bring back a government that is able to perform and govern and provide the services that the population needs. And it's a moment to test this. Whether that will happen or not, we don't know, but the humanitarian situation will continue to be very difficult, especially also with a withdrawal of US funding, because that was a major part of the humanitarian aid in Yemen. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of optimism in that front.
This episode of The New Arab Voice was written and produced by me, Hugo Goodridge. Our theme music was by Omar Al-Fil. The New Arab Voice will be back with a new episode shortly. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified when a new episode drops. You can find the links in the show notes. Until then, you can find all our previous episodes on all major podcast platforms. You can check out our social media accounts on Instagram and X, both at TNA Podcasts, for additional content. And you can email us, podcast@newarab.com. You can subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And you can also rate and review, which helps us spread the word. Don't forget to follow The New Arab on Facebook, X and Instagram for all the latest news, analysis and opinion from the region.